My husband kept a secret for 35 years, and now as the earth settles over his grave, that secret is standing in front of me. The moment our eyes met, I felt something inside me collapse. A life I thought I knew, a marriage I thought was whole, unraveling in silence before a crowd of mourners. My hands tightened around the funeral program until the paper tore, but still I couldn't move. He didn't need to say a word. The resemblance was enough to steal the breath from my chest. Grief had already hollowed me out, but this was different. This was betrayal, wrapped in flesh and blood. And yet, beneath the despair, something stirred in me. Not weakness, not surrender, but something sharper, something that would not be buried with him. As the whispers rippled through the crowd, I asked myself a question I never imagined I would face. Who was the man I married? And what does that make me, now that the truth is no longer his to keep? To answer that, I have to take you back to the beginning of a story I never wanted to tell, but one that refuses to stay silent. My heart hammered, but my voice did not betray me. You'll receive what the law says is yours, I told the stranger, who had Richard's eyes and my grandson's dimples. But you will not take this moment from me. Behind him, a man in a navy coat, lawyer by the look of him, tilted his head, already calculating. They thought grief had made me soft. They didn't know what the past 3 weeks had taught me, because the night before Richard died, I found a key taped inside his tool chest and a note in the pocket of his robe. Bank box. For you. I had already opened it. I had already read the pages he never found the courage to say out loud. I had already called my own attorney. Little did they know I was preparing for this day. How could the man I loved for 52 years hide a child from me? And why did his son arrive with a lawyer before the flowers on the grave had time to wilt? To answer that, to tell you what I did next, I have to go back to the beginning. I had been washing Richard's robe because the hospice nurse had left it folded at the foot of the bed. The chemo had left everything smelling faintly of tin and rain. As I shook it out, a folded note slid from the pocket, marked only with my name. His handwriting had grown thin over the last months, as if every letter cost him breath. There's a key in the red Stanley box. Box 214 at Lake County Savings. I didn't say it to protect you. I said nothing, and that was the same as a lie. Forgive me if you can. If you cannot, keep what is yours. The red Stanley box sat beneath decades of careful clutter in his workshop. Coffee cans of screws, tennis balls for the walker he swore he would never need, the radio that only tuned to sports and weather. I pressed my fingers under the tray of wrenches, and there it was, taped under the rusted lip, cool against my skin. The bank closed in an hour. I put on my coat and didn't tell the nurse where I was going. At 72, I have learned the weight of a minute. The clerk at Lake County Savings recognized my name. Widow-to-be is a face the whole town learns to wear before the funeral. She led me to a private room, turned the key, and slid the thin metal drawer onto a table. Inside were 3 things: a thick envelope, a photograph of a baby with Richard's mouth, and a brass key fob with a number scratched on the back. The envelope was heavy with papers, insurance statements, photocopies of checks, a printed email thread with his business partner Lionel, who'd been at our kitchen table so many Sunday afternoons that the dog stopped barking when he came through the door. On top lay a letter addressed to me, Margot, not Maggie as everyone else called me. Only Richard called me Margot when he wanted to be forgiven. The letter was dated June of last year, months before the word unsaid took shape as the tumour we could finally point to. I did a wrong that grew roots. Before we married, a woman named Evelyn and I had a son. I paid support quietly. I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you because I knew you would leave. I loved you. It is no excuse. When David turned 19, he found me. I saw him twice a year. He asked me to tell you. I never did. I put it off until later and later ran out. There was more, pages more, Lionel's name threaded through like a stain, a loan taken against the shop without my knowledge, signatures that looked like Richard's but felt off under my finger, emails where Lionel pressed him to sell a parcel of land my father left me at a price that read like a joke if you'd ever stood under the cottonwoods there at dusk. There were transfers to a company I had never heard of, Black Thistle Consulting, and notes in Richard's hand that said things like, "Ask Elle," "Why this is necessary," and "Don't tell M." At the bottom a short postscript in a smaller, shaking hand, "If I don't make it, speak to Attorney Patel." Box key on fob is for the workshop locker I kept at the shop. Top shelf. There's a folder you'll need. I went back to the hospice and sat with him until morning, my fingers around that brass fob as if it were a pulse. He woke once and watched me watch him. "You found it," he whispered. It wasn't a question. "I found it," I said. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" His eyes sank like stones in a clear river. He covered my hand with his wedding ring turned thin by weight loss. "I wanted to be better," he said. I wasn't. "Is David your son?" "Yes." He closed his eyes. "I should have told you. I thought tomorrow." "You always did," I said. Because the truth didn't care for bedside manners. He died at 4 a.m, with my hand in his, and the nurse humming quietly from the hall. By 9, I had called Attorney Patel. By noon, I had found the locker at the back of the machine shop and the folder that lived there. Inside it sat copies of 2 wills, one from 10 years ago, leaving everything to me and the children, the other from 3 months ago, witnessed by Lionel and the bookkeeper, carving out a share for a predeceased child's issue, legal words that could cradle a stranger. But the letter in the bank box changed the shape of the fight. There were also receipts, wire transfers to Black Thistle, reshuffled into Lionel's wife's maiden name. A napkin from Pete's Diner with Richard's quick, nervous pen. L. Says if I don't agree, he'll tell M. About D. He says he'd destroy the shop. If he tells her, I lose her anyway. I read that sentence 3 times and felt something in me go still. the way the lake freezes not with a crack but a hush. I took copies of everything and put the originals back. Attorney Patel, she was younger than my son, and carried herself like a violin string, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "two things can be true. Your husband likely has a child, and your husband's partner likely took advantage of him. What do I need to do? We open probate immediately and petition the court to appoint you as personal representative. We request a DNA test if David seeks a share. We freeze the shop's accounts before Lionel can move anything and file an injunction preventing the sale of any real property until we untangle this, and if you are willing, we take these documents to the county prosecutor." "Willing?" She looked at me steadily. "It may expose your husband's choices. It may shame him. It will certainly shame Lionel." "Shame is not my concern," I said, and, for the first time since I could remember, I meant it. The funeral arrived like a slow storm. David arrived with a lawyer named Kincaid, whose tie was the color of a bruise and whose eyes kept sliding past mine to measure the crowd. "We're not here to cause trouble," he murmured to me at the graveside, as if trouble were a choice one makes like dessert. "We only want what's fair." "Fair?" I said. "Tell me about fair, Mr. Kincaid. Tell me about 35 years. He opened his mouth, but David touched his sleeve. "Let her bury him," he said, and his voice, there was something there that wasn't a lawyer's script. It made me look closer at the line of his jaw, at the way grief does not ask permission to sit in anyone's face. After the cemetery, we gathered in the church basement, where casseroles go to be judged by women who have done harder things in smaller rooms. Lionel stood by the coffee urn, offering his version of a sympathetic frown to anyone with a heartbeat. When he saw me, he reached for my elbow as if he'd ever had the right to touch me. "You should have let me handle this," he said low. "I would have kept the spectacle down." "You handled a great deal already," I said. "I'll handle it from here." He smiled without teeth. "You don't know what you don't know. That's why men like you sleep well," I said. "You think ignorance is rest." Ben came up behind me, jaw set. "Mom, do you want me to ask them to leave?" "No," I said. "I want to hear what they think they have." I turned to David. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, my kitchen. Bring Mr. Kincaid if you must. Bring his paperwork. I'll have mine." Kincaid inclined his head, as if I'd confirmed a reservation. Lionel's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. Something tightened in his face when he realized Kincaid wasn't with him. That knot was my first small satisfaction. It snowed that night, a thin, mean snow that turns tire tracks into secrets. I made coffee at 8:45 and laid out the copies from the bank box, alongside photographs of the children at ages I could still list like a litany. At 9 on the dot, David arrived with Kincaid, who sat and opened a leather folder that tried very hard to look expensive. "This is simple," he began. "Your husband, Richard," I said, "acknowledged a child born out of wedlock. State law recognizes many things," I said, "including fraud." I slid the napkin across the table. "And coercion," The napkin wasn't much, but it was the beginning of a road. I put down the emails next, where Lionel bullied and wheedled, where Richard's replies grew shorter until they were only the word, fine. Kincaid's mouth flattened. This is irrelevant to paternity. Maybe, I said, but it's very relevant to why you're at my table instead of meeting me at a mediator's office in 2 months, like any decent man who didn't want to make a widow's week longer. David watched me over the rim of his coffee cup. He meant to tell you, he said, not like a defense, but like a memory. I believe that, I said, and the honesty seemed to surprise him. Did he ever bring you to the shop? Twice, he said, when no one was there. So you never met Lionel? He shook his head. Kincaid cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, emotions aside, we're prepared to file a claim first thing tomorrow, unless we can— Oh, file today, I said. My petition went in yesterday, and the court signed the order freezing accounts at the shop this morning. Kincaid blinked. On what grounds? I slid over a copy of the injunction. On the grounds that while my husband was dying, his business partner transferred funds to a shell company controlled by his wife's maiden name, LLC, on the grounds that he tried to sell real property that never belonged to the company, and on the grounds that I intend to ask the prosecutor to look at whether that constitutes theft. Kincaid's eyes moved like a man counting chairs at a table that suddenly seemed smaller. You went to the prosecutor? I did. I let him sit with that. David, I said, turning to the young man who had my grandson's dimples when he tried not to smile. If you are my husband's son, you will have what the law provides, but you should know who is advising you. I tapped the napkin. You should know who leveraged you without knowing your face. Kincaid started to speak. David put a hand on his folder. What do you want from me? Patience, I said, and a blood test. He nodded. Kincaid scowled, but he didn't say no. When they left, I stood at the kitchen window and watched their car back out, the snow squeaking under the tires like something small and offended. Ben came in from the garage, wiping his hands. You were calm, he said. I don't think I could have been. I was not calm, I said. I was busy. Busy feels like a kind of prayer when you don't know what else to do. I spent the afternoon sorting tax returns that smelled of attic and winter. Julia came by with soup and took over the stacks, her fingers quick and sure. He should have told you, she said finally. He should have, I said. But we don't get to choose the apologies we receive. What will you do if the test is positive? Love your father less? I said. I already tried that once. It doesn't fit. I put my hand over hers. If David is Richard's son, he's family. Family doesn't always mean what it used to. It still means something. The next day we met Attorney Patel at her office, which looked like a room where arguments come to be disarmed, then sealed in labelled envelopes. She had already filed for letters of administration. She had already reached the bank. She had already drafted a letter to Lionel's counsel demanding he preserve all electronic records. He will ignore it, she said. Then he will remember it when I subpoena his hard drives. She looked at me. We should talk about the land. The cottonwoods, Bayern, I said, they were my father's. She nodded. The deeds were never properly recorded when your father passed. Lionel tried to sweep them into the shop's collateral to cover his loan. We're going to correct that. She slid a prepared deed across the table. You'll sign here, and we'll walk it to the recorder's office today. What about Kincaid? Ben asked. He'll file something. He'll file a claim for a share of the estate contingent on paternity, Patel said. We'll stipulate to testing and ask the court to hold any distribution until we resolve the theft. If David is Richard's son, he has rights. If he is not, his lawyer will go back to corporate law and take another case where grief makes people easy. We signed. We walked to the recorder's office. The clerk behind the glass window had a calendar with birds and a pen with flowers pressed inside it. She stamped the papers like she was pressing a bruise to see if it would fade. At home, the phone rang. It was Evelyn, the voice I didn't know but felt in my bones as the source of 35 silent years. I told him to wait, she said. But David's stubborn, like his father. Why did you call now? Because I heard about the injunction, she said, a little breathless. Lionel called me. He wasn't happy. He said I should rein in my son. She gave a small, incredulous laugh that made me like her against my will. As if I ever could. Why does Lionel have your number? She paused, a second too long. We all knew each other back then. He was around. Was he around when you were pregnant? Another pause. Sometimes. Did he ever give you money? Silence turned the line into a room I could walk into and look around. Once, she said finally. For rent. He said it was from Richard, but he didn't want me to tell anyone. Of course he didn't. I swallowed. Did he ever ask you to keep David away? He said it would be better for everyone. He said Richard had a family. He said it would ruin things. For whom? She let out a breath. It always ruins things for the woman first. We met the next afternoon at a coffee shop by the bus station. She wore her hair in a neat grey bob and a pair of earrings I would have complimented if I hadn't been holding my heart in my mouth. We sat with paper cups between us. I loved him, she said, without ceremony. It was brief, and it was foolish, and it was mine. He left because he wanted your kind of life. I told myself that was noble. I told myself a lot of things. I loved him too, I said. For longer, and not always nobly. She smiled, tired and rueful. David thinks he's owed what he didn't get as a child. Maybe he is, but I wish he would see what he has now. What does he have now? Choice, she said. And the chance not to be Lionel's pawn. He came to me 2 days before the funeral with that lawyer, and I smelled Lionel all over it. Men like him leave the scent of gasoline in a clean room. I slid a copy of the napkin across to her. He threatened Richard, with you. She read it and closed her eyes, the way a person grips a railing when the train takes a turn. I should have told you, she said. I should have called you 20 years ago. I was ashamed. He told me you were kind. He told me you would hate me. I believed the second thing because it was easier. Do you hate me? No, I said. I don't have room for it. We parted strangers who knew the same man from opposite ends of the same bed. The next day the DNA test happened in a clinic that smelled of lemon and old magazines. David sat across from me, sleeves rolled, jaw set. Is there anything you want? I asked. Other than money? He looked surprised at his own answer. To have known him, he said. To not feel like a mistake somebody paid for. He rubbed his arm where the nurse had swabbed. I thought I'd be angry at you. It was easier before I knew you'd already seen the letter, easier before I knew about Lionel. Anger is often easier than the other thing, I said. What's the other thing? Grief. In the days that followed, Patel filed a complaint with the prosecutor. A detective named Ruiz came to my living room and asked if he could take the originals from the bank box. I'll get you receipts, he said. He was the kind of man who tells you 3 different ways he's not there to hurt you because he knows the badge sometimes says otherwise. He looked around at the framed photographs and the quilt draped over the back of the couch. My mother made one just like that, he said, except the corners are crooked. She says the crookedness is where the love lives. You can tell your mother I agree, I said, and he smiled. Lionel called that night. You're making a mistake, he said without hello. I've made so many, I said. It would be rude to stop now without giving you your turn. It won't change anything, he said. The company will still have debts. The land will still be tangled. David will still be your husband's son. That last part might be the only thing worth changing me, I said. Good night, Lionel. 2 mornings later, Patel called. The prosecutor authorized a search warrant for the shop, she said. They're going in at 10. You should be there. I arrived to find Ruiz already there, his breath a cloud in the cold. Lionel stood with his arms folded, a lawyer of his own at his elbow now, a man with a soft voice and hard eyes. This is outrageous, Lionel said when he saw me. You're destroying your husband's legacy. You already did, I said. I'm just sweeping up. They took computers, ledgers, a box of invoices from a closet that smelled like oil and resentment. In the back office, Ruiz opened a drawer and pulled out a folder marked Black Thistle. Inside were contracts, services rendered for consulting, signed by Lionel and countersigned by a woman whose signature I knew from the photocopies in the bank box, his wife's maiden name. The amounts made my jaw ache. Mrs. Hale, Ruiz said quietly, this is good for us. He meant it was bad for Lionel. I stood very still and felt the kind of calm that sometimes sits beside rage and holds its hand, the calm that lets you make a plan. The plan began with the land. We had the deed recorded. Patel filed an action to quiet title, a phrase that sounded like bedtime, but was really a summons to a fight. In the meantime, I did the thing grief allows you if you're lucky. I remembered who I was before my life became a schedule of medications. I drove out to the cottonwoods at dusk. The snow lay thin and clean. I stood there and said his name out loud to the trees who don't care and never pretend to. A week later, the DNA results arrived. Patel called me into her office. David was already there with Kincaid, hands folded like a schoolboy trying to be good. Patel read the lab report and set it down. Probability of paternity greater than 99.9%, she said. David is Richard's biological son. David swallowed, and in that sound I heard the end of a long argument he must have had with himself since he grew old enough to look in the mirror and know he looked like someone. "Thank you," he said to Patel, then to me, and I kept my face where it was instead of where my heart wanted to drop it, into my hands. Kincaid sat back, satisfied. "We'll amend our claim," he said, "and we'll be seeking a share commensurate with state law," Patel said evenly, "which will be paid after debts, taxes, and the resolution of the theft. In the meantime, David, I would like to make you an offer." Kincaid glanced at him, then at her. "We'd prefer to wait." "I'm not speaking to you," Patel said without raising her voice. She turned to David. "Mrs. Hale has authorized me to create a trust for you. It will distribute a monthly stipend immediately for living expenses while the estate is pending. Upon final distribution, there will be a lump sum. In exchange, you'll agree not to contest the will or the deed work we've just completed. You will also agree to meet with a forensic accountant and answer questions under oath about any contact you or your mother had with Lionel regarding the estate." Kincaid opened his mouth. David put a hand up, a small, quiet gesture that surprised them both. "What are you doing?" Kincaid hissed. "This undermines—" "I'm considering an offer," David said. "One that lets me stop being the stick someone else beats you with." He looked at me. "You don't owe me kindness." "No," I said. "I owe you honesty." He nodded once. "I'll take the trust," he said. "I'll testify to whatever I know." Kincaid gathered his papers. "We'll need to review documents," he said, brittle. "We'll respond by the end of the week." He was used to being the loudest in the room. He did not know how to be when he wasn't. He left tight-lipped, David trailing, glancing back once like a boy leaving a school where he had learned the wrong lessons first. That night, Julia called from her car. "Mom," she said, voice low, "I saw Lionel leaving Kincaid's office after hours. Ben says he's been there twice this week." "Of course he has," I said. "He's paying for the orchestra. He wants to pick the song." "What will you do?" "What we've been doing," I said. "And one more thing Lionel won't expect." The one more thing arrived in the form of a woman named Portia, who had been the bookkeeper at the shop for 24 years and had recently quit without fuss. I found her bagging apples at the market and asked if she had time for coffee. She did. We sat by the window while the town went about pretending not to watch us. "I don't like getting in the middle," she said, "but I've been in the middle for too long." She slid a thumb drive across the table. "I copied the ledgers the day I left, in case I needed to protect myself, or someone else. Why now? Because Lionel called me last night and asked me to come by to clean up the books, and because I'm tired. And because my sister says sometimes you have to open a window to let the smell out." Patel sat with me at my kitchen table that evening while we opened the files. There they were, entries marked "consulting" that matched the Black Thistle invoices to the dollar small transfers made on Fridays when Richard was at chemo, email exchanges where Lionel wrote, "You owe me," and Richard replied, "I owe my wife." The oldest file was dated the year David turned 19. We brought it all to Ruiz. He looked at the lines of numbers and breathed out softly. "I can take this to the grand jury," he said. "It won't be quick, but it will be real." "Make it real," I said. Lionel must have felt the tide turn, because he went from calls to silence. Silence is a tactic too. It makes you wonder what grows in the dark. Ben kept offering to go talk to him. "You'll do nothing of the kind," I said. "You can carry heavy things and fix the boiler. When it rattles, let me carry this." "Let you?" he said. And I heard the boy in the man, the one who used to test the weight of a dare by throwing it back at me. "I wasn't asking," I said. He smiled despite himself. "Yes, ma'am." The reading of the will took place in a conference room with stiff chairs and art that wanted badly to be neutral. Lionel arrived with his lawyer and a pall of cologne that made my throat itch. David came alone. Evelyn had written him a letter encouraging him to listen more than he spoke. He folded it into his wallet like a shield. The original 10-year-old will left everything to me and the children in equal shares. The newer document, Patel had already filed a challenge to its validity, allocated a portion to any child not otherwise provided for. There were codicils, one dated the week after David visited Richard at the shop for the last time. Patel walked through it carefully, her voice as professional as a surgeon's hands. "Any questions?" she asked at the end. Lionel's lawyer cleared his throat. "We intend to challenge the older will. We believe Richard intended the newer distribution." "You would," Patel said. "You witnessed it." "That doesn't invalidate it," he said. "No," she said. "The forgery does." She set a lab report on the table. We submitted both wills to a forensic document examiner. The signature on the newer document shows signs of tracing and pressure, inconsistencies consistent with simulation. Mr. Hale's illness also affected his ability to sign, but not in the way this signature reflects. In short, a jury will likely find this was not his hand. Silence met that, the kind that means the room has inhaled and refuses to exhale until someone confesses. Lionel swallowed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Who would benefit from that?" "You," Patel said evenly, "because the newer will give the shop authority to liquidate certain assets quickly, assets you had already lined up a buyer for, a buyer whose LLC shares an address with Black Thistle." Lionel stood so fast his chair rasped the carpet. "This is slander." "This is discovery," Sharm Patel said. "And this," she nodded to the door, "is Detective Ruiz, who has a few questions." Ruiz stepped in as if he had always been in the hallway, which of course he had. He nodded to me, then to Lionel. "Mr. Carter," he said, using Lionel's last name like a key in a lock, "I have a warrant for your phone." Lionel laughed, but it was a poor, dry sound. "You can't just—" Ruiz held up the paper. "I can." He turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, would you like to wait in my office?" "No," I said. "I'd like to sit right here." They took Lionel's phone, and with it the last of his certainty. He left without looking at me. David stayed, his hands open on the table. I didn't know, he said quietly. Not about any of this. I know, I said. Come by the house on Sunday. I make a roast that could make enemies forget their grudges for an afternoon. We'll talk about what comes next. What does come next? He asked. Work, I said, and a decision about the shop. The shop was the heart of Richard's life. It had also become a mouth that ate money. Lionel had starved it by feeding himself. We could close it, Patel said. Sell the equipment, pay the debts, keep the land. We could, I said, or we could open the doors properly for the first time in years. Do you want to run a machine shop? She asked. One eyebrow arched. I want to give the men who built their backs there a place that isn't run by a thief, I said. And if we can't, I want to close it with dignity instead of a fire sale. David came Sunday and sat at my table with Ben and Julia and the children who ran in and out like small weather systems. He watched the way we passed plates, the way we argued about whether to add apples to the salad, the way grief sits down at dinner and eats first. When the plates were cleared, I put a folder in front of him. This is the trust, I said. It's yours whether you work with me or not. But if you want to, there's something I could use help with. He looked at the page. The Garnet Fund? I touched the ring Richard gave me on our 15th anniversary, a small red stone that had seen more kitchens than ballrooms. A scholarship, I said, for kids who want to learn a trade, for men and women who keep the lights on and the water running and are told that makes them less important. We'll use the shop's profits, if we can make any, and we'll start with a donation from the life insurance. He frowned. Life insurance? Keyman policy, Ben said. The company took it out on Dad years ago. It pays out to the company, not the family. It would have, I said. But the night I found the key, I found something else. A rider Richard signed last year, changing the beneficiary to a trust we control if Lionel is removed as an officer for cause. Patel filed the paperwork last week. Lionel is out. The money is ours to use for the company or the fund. David looked at me as if I had pulled a rabbit out of a hat. You did all that in a month. I did what women like me always do, I said. I looked at what was broken, and I made a list. The grand jury returned an indictment against Lionel in the spring. Embezzlement, fraud, forgery, words that sound like textbooks until you see the faces they shape. He pleaded not guilty. His lawyer made statements about witch hunts and grieving widows who didn't understand business. I wore my best navy dress to the first hearing and sat where he could see me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Rui squeezed my shoulder in the hallway and said, Corner's still crooked. My mother says that's where the love goes. Your mother is right, I said. In the meantime, we reopened the shop. Ben took a leave from his job to help. Portia returned as bookkeeper with a raise and a seat at the weekly meeting that was not for show. We replaced Lionel's hateful coffee with something that didn't taste like compromise. We cleaned the break room. We hung a bulletin board and asked the men what they needed instead of telling them what we would allow. David came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sweeping floors and asking questions. He started slowly, like a person approaching a house he isn't sure will let him in. The day the first scholarship applications came in, we spread them on the kitchen table. A girl whose father had been at the shop for 20 years wrote about wanting to become a welder. A boy who fixed lawn mowers in his yard since he was 11 wrote about the smell of oil as if it were a catechism. We chose 3. David cried when we called the first one. He looked startled at himself. "Sorry," he said, wiping his face. "Don't be," I said. "It means the corners are good." The twist I didn't see coming arrived on a Wednesday when the mail was thin and the sky was the color of a bruise. A letter from the bank, addressed to Richard, to our house, postmarked 6 months before he died. Inside, a notice of a loan taken by Ben using the shop as collateral. I sat down so slowly it felt like sitting in a river. Ben's name looked like a stranger's handwriting wearing his clothes. I called him. He came over immediately, his face already telling me that a piece of him had been waiting for this shoe to fall. He sat and put his hands flat on the table the way men do when they're about to say a truth that will make them smaller. "I had a gambling problem," he said. "I thought I had it under control. I took the loan to cover what I owed. Dad co-signed. Lionel arranged it." He swallowed. "I've been paying it back. I almost have, but when Dad got sick I fell behind." "How much?" He told me. It was a number that makes mothers sit very still so their sons don't see the way their hearts are loud. "You should have told me," I said. "I was ashamed," he said. "And Lionel told me not to. He said he would handle it if I voted his way at the board meeting about the land." He closed his eyes. "I wanted to believe him. I wanted not to disappoint you." "At what point," I asked, "did any of that protect me?" He put his head in his hands. "None of it. I made tea because women in my family have always made tea at the edge of a cliff." Then I called Patel. She was silent for a moment, then said, "We can add this to the pattern. It shows Lionel used your husband's illness and your son's weakness to tighten his control. It doesn't excuse Ben, but it explains him." Ben paid back the rest of the loan with interest. He sold his truck and kept the old one he'd always meant to fix. He went to meetings in the church basement where men introduced themselves by their first names and their worst mistakes. He came home, smelling of coffee, and relief. Summer came. The cottonwoods wore green, like forgiveness you don't quite trust. Lionel's trial date was set for September. In July, Kincaid withdrew as David's lawyer. The Bar Association opened an investigation into his relationship with Lionel. David came by with a bag of peaches and a look that said he had grown an inch in a month. "I took a job," he said, "at the community college. They needed someone to coordinate apprenticeships. I told them about the fund. They want to partner." He smiled, a little shy. "I also wanted to ask if I could help with the scholarship interviews." "You have to promise to cry only in the kitchen," I said. He laughed, and we peeled peaches over the sink like women in stories who grow old on porches and forgive the world for being itself. At trial, Lionel's lawyer tried to turn the story into a math problem, numbers without faces, transfers without names. But Ruiz's quiet voice, Portia's thumb drive, the expert who explained the forged signature, and the emails that began the year David turned 19 and stretched like a road to the present, these were people, not numbers. The jury looked at Lionel the way you look at a man who has borrowed your car and returned it, without brakes. He was convicted. He didn't look at me when the verdict was read. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me how I felt. I said tired, and then I said grateful, and then I went home and sat on the back steps while the light went down in the yard. I had watered through 3 droughts and 1 winter where everything we loved looked like it might die and then didn't. Afterward, we sold part of the land to the town for a park at a fair price that felt like a prayer uttered where a lie had once been told. We kept the shop. We turned a profit by the end of the year. The Garnet Fund awarded 10 scholarships the next spring. I sent each recipient a note that said not to thank me, but to pass the kindness on before someone asked. David read his father's letters, and then put them in a box and then got them out again 2 days later because grief is a loop that trusts no calendar. On the anniversary of Richard's death, we went to the cemetery with flowers. David stood with me while the wind did whatever it wanted. I keep thinking, he said, how different my life would have been if he'd told you, if he'd told me. It would have been different, I said. Better, maybe, or maybe just different. I touched the stone. He was a good man who did a bad thing and then did 3 more to cover it. How do you love someone like that? The same way you love anyone? I said, with your eyes open. We stood there a long time. When we left, I took the long way home past the shop. The lights were on. The sound of the machines made a hum that felt like a pulse. Portia waved from the office. Ben rolled a cart across the floor with a care that looked like penance and like pride. David stopped at the bulletin board to read a notice about a community college job fair. He wrote a note beneath it about the Garnet Fund with his phone number. It was his handwriting now, not a ghost's. That night I made a list of everything that had been taken from me and everything I had taken back. The lists were not equal. They rarely are. But the second list was longer than I had expected. At the top, in my own careful print, I wrote, I kept my name, I kept my land, I kept my children, I kept my kindness, without letting it be used against me. I circled that last one until the ink bled. People say revenge tastes sweet. I don't know that I agree. It tasted like hard bread and strong coffee, and the sound of a door that had been closed for years, opening on hinges that needed oiling. It tasted like work. It tasted like the clean air after a room has been aired out, and you realize you had been breathing something stale so long you forgot the difference. Months later, Evelyn and I sat together at a scholarship banquet. She wore the same earrings. I asked where she bought them. She told me a story about a flea market and a woman who insisted on $5 when they were easily worth 20. We laughed. We watched a girl in steel-toe boots shake hands with a donor who had never been in a shop that didn't sell antiques. David made a speech that made me think of Richard at 19, all elbows and hope and a laugh that came up from somewhere honest. After the plates were cleared, Evelyn touched my arm. "Do you forgive him?" she asked. "I live with him," I said. "In my head, in my house, in our children. Forgiveness is another word for that." "And me?" she asked, braver than I would have been. I looked at her for a long time and saw how women carry men's choices in their bones like an extra rib. "I forgave you the day you called me," I said. "I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to stay human." She nodded, eyes wet but steady. "Thank you." When I got home, I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the yard, where the hose lay curled like a sleeping blue snake. I thought about the girl with the welding certificate, about the boy who had never owned a suit and wore one like he had been born to it, about my son who had learned to say his name and his flaw in the same sentence and not look at the flaw, about my daughter who came by with soup and stayed to sort ledgers, because love is a chore and a choice at once. I thought about David, who had walked into a funeral and asked for what he thought the world owed him, and walked out with something harder and better, a place at a table with people who would pass him the potatoes and the truth. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like absence anymore. I turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hall, my hand sliding along the wall the way it has for 50 years of nights. In the bedroom, the robe still hung on the back of the door. I touched the pocket where the note had been, the beginning of the end and the start of the rest. Outside, the cottonwoods counted the wind. Inside, I counted what was left and what had been made new. And in the space where anger had once nested, there was room enough for grief and for something else that felt like peace. This is not the story I would have chosen, but it is the one I have. And if you want to know how we kept the shop open, through a winter when the orders slowed and the heat bill grew teeth, if you want to know how David sat across from Lionel at sentencing and spoke without raising his voice, if you want to know what came of the land and the fund and the small ways a life rebuilt itself brick by stubborn brick, I can tell you. I can tell you about the morning the park opened and the town mayor said a few kind words, and then my grandson found a smooth stone by the bench and declared it treasure. And for the first time since I held that brass fob in my hand, I believed him. I believed that treasure could be a bench, a boy, a shop humming with honest noise, a ring with a red stone that meant more because of the hands that washed the dishes while wearing it. I believed that secrets can end and still leave something worth keeping. But to understand how we got there, I had to start at a graveside, with a young man's voice slicing the cold, and a letter that said what love was always meant to say: "I did a wrong. I am sorry. If you can, keep what is yours. I kept what was mine." And then I made room for the rest.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.